And President Trump revealed Monday that he met and interviewed 4 potential Supreme Court candidates, describing them as, quote, outstanding people. The president is expected to announce next Monday who he will choose to succeed Justice Anthony Kennedy, who resigned last week. Jan Crawford is in Washington following the story.
In the morning, I interviewed and met with 4 potential justices of our great Supreme Court.
As the president weighs his choice, moderate Republican Senator Susan Collins said she was not comfortable with everyone he has considered.
I would not support a nominee who demonstrated hostility to Roe v. Wade.
Sources say Collins specifically opposes federal appeals court judge William Pryor, who once called Roe an abomination. A top finalist to replace Justice Antonin Scalia, sources say Pryor has been eliminated this time. 2 leading contenders, sources say, are federal appeals court judges Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. Kavanaugh has the elite credentials the president wants and is a favorite of the conservative legal establishment. At his confirmation hearing in 2006 to the prestigious D.C. Circuit, he said as an appellate judge, he considered Roe settled law.
If confirmed to the D.C. Circuit, I would follow Roe v. Wade faithfully and fully.
Barrett is a favorite of the grassroots and would most fire up the base.
My personal church affiliation or my religious belief would not bear in the discharge of my duties as a judge.
At her appeals court confirmation hearing last year, Democrats focused on her Catholic faith to suggest she would overturn Roe v. Wade.
Dogma lives loudly within you, and that's of concern.
That backfired on Democrats amid allegations of anti-religious bias. Barrett was narrowly confirmed, garnering 3 Democratic votes.
Joining me now from Washington to discuss the Supreme Court news is CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford. So, Jan, as you reported, the president's favorites right now seem to be federal appeals court judges Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. What are you hearing in terms of any bipartisan support for either of these 2 candidates?
Well, that's part of kind of what the president is doing right now as he's considering these nominees and weighing his choices and talking to them and trying to kind of get a sense of who they are as people in addition to their legal qualifications. He's also making these calls with senators up on Capitol Hill because, I mean, this nomination has got to be airtight if they're going to get that justice confirmed and on the bench, as they hope to do, by the first Monday in October. So he's making phone calls. He's reaching out to senators because they really have got to get everybody on board as they go forward.
Now, it's being reported that White House counsel Don McGahn will oversee the process of vetting and nominating, and Deputy Press Secretary Raj Shah will handle communications. The White House seems to be very methodical, and this is not a White House that's quite known for that. They seem to be taking this very seriously.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, of course, the Supreme Court pick is a president's most lasting legacy. And I think that's why you also saw the White House operate in a very similar way for President Trump's first nomination when he put Justice Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. I mean, these nominees, prospective nominees, are all highly qualified, kind of conservative legal rock stars. It's a really conventional list. It's a list that you would kind of expect to see from any Republican president. If you remember when President Trump was candidate Trump, you know, people would sometimes speculate, you know, who would he put on the Supreme Court? Judge Judy, like it's a joke. But no, I mean, his Supreme Court prospective nominees are all like right in the mainstream of conservative legal thought. And they've gone about this process, as you said, in a very methodical and disciplined way, just as they did when they put Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court last year.
But, Jan, how likely is it that a nominee can even pass such an evenly divided Senate?
Oh, it's highly likely, and I would say almost certain that will happen. You're going to see all 50, I would guess, Republican senators united on this, just as they were for Justice Neil Gorsuch to replace Justice Scalia. And I wouldn't be surprised if you also didn't have some Democrats casting their vote for this nominee. Keep in mind, I mean, you've got several of those Democrats from red states in an election year. It's going to be very difficult for them to vote no. These are from states that really went big for Trump. It's going to be hard for them to vote no. So, for example, Amy Barrett, she is going to really fire up the base and rile up the left. But if you're a Joe Manchin or a Joe Donnelly, say from Indiana, West Virginia, it's going to be hard for them to vote against her, and they voted for her when she was up for the appeals court.
Is she seen as more conservative than Kavanaugh?
Well, I think she's certainly seen as someone, I wouldn't say she's more conservative. I think they both have very solid conservative legal credentials, but she is someone that the grassroots and the base would be very excited about, because and I think you have to kind of look back to her confirmation hearing last year when she was put on the Chicago-based federal appeals court. Democrats really kind of went after her for her religious views. She's a Catholic. She's written about her Catholic faith and spoken openly about faith in general, and that really backfired on them. They were trying to kind of make the point that she might overturn Roe versus Wade or follow her religious beliefs instead of the law, and that she totally turned the tables on them. So conservatives loved that. I mean, they thought she kind of walked through the fire, and not only did she survive, but they're the ones that got burned. So they would be, I think, probably the most excited about her nomination. But Kavanaugh also has an enormous amount of support, and so do some of the others that are also being interviewed by the president. And this president, we're told these are front runners right now, but he'll
do what he wants to do in the end. Absolutely. But, Senator Susan Collins of Maine is, of course, seen as having a lot of influence in this nomination because she can sink it with her vote. And she did speak about what she's looking for in a justice Sunday on CNN. Let's play it.
I would not support a nominee who demonstrated hostility to Roe v. Wade, because that would mean to me that their judicial philosophy did not include a respect for established decisions, established law. And I believe that that is a very important fundamental tenet of our judicial system.
But, Jan, you see, a nominee doesn't really have to demonstrate hostility to still vote against Roe v. Wade. So, that seems like a very high bar.
Well, I think with Senator Collins, we've already seen her knock off one nominee. Judge William Pryor, a very highly regarded, kind of intellectual heavyweight federal appeals court judge, was in the very top of the president's shortlist for the last nomination to replace Justice Scalia. He was interviewed by the president, but Susan Collins had reservations about him. He had said in the past that he thought Roe versus Wade was an abomination, in fact, the worst abomination of constitutional law in history.
Right, but none of these frontrunners have said anything like that.
Well, but Bill Pryor is not a frontrunner this time either. So,
right.
He was on the bigger list, so he's not being considered this time.
Right.
And none of the others have said that anything like that. And judges,
I guess my point is that Susan Collins could easily support either of these two candidates.
Oh, based on what we know right now, I think there's really nothing in their records that would suggest that kind of hostility, to Roe versus Wade. But you're right. I think that's right. I think that she certainly voted for Amy Barrett for the appeals court, and I could see her supporting Brett Kavanaugh as well.
All right, Jan Crawford, thank you so much for your insight.